regardless of how each individual has decided as to the design of their respective consciousness, the idea, agreement, construct of it that affects then body form and creational circumstance. The reality of every being is a real awareness that's sole objective is the recognition of the true reality, the isness it is a part of, through the comparison that everything in creation, every idea affords, that which is unreal and simulated, to recognize that which is real, the all is. When the real awareness decides this objective, that of is recognition, so will be the challenge to get the personal created self on board. The hints and references will in some shape or form feature in the experience of the personal self, and so then must the decision be made to align the personal intent with the real awareness, real intent of recognizing the true reality. The struggle then is really with the personal created self, a necessary creation that affords a position other than the nowness of the isness, real awareness position, where comparison then is available, but that can present as quite the burden, what with the personal self having developed and maintained its attachments for the millions of lifetimes since its inception, and rather the painstaking process of releasing such to be sure, but essential should we wish to be untethered from creation and stand in the full magnitude of our real awareness, true being states. When the moment comes where we begin such a process, we may find ourselves, wherever positioned we may be in creation, utilizing the body form that reflects and is effected from our consciousness design, but realistically, at that very moment, everything we have created up until that point, regardless of how adverse in relation to others our choices may have been, these ideas now are as comparison references that serve this singular real intent is recognizing objective, and so we would endeavor to not only release attachment and consideration from the body forms and created identities, but that we also recognize this in others also. We see through the simulated surface. For at this time many species are stepping up and becoming more aware, and naturally certain species will carry a certain reputation with them, especially the dastardly ones, and easy can it be to fall into immediate consideration based on the body type as opposed to the intent of the individual. As the real awareness decides to recognize the ears, as the personal self gets on board and the created body forms are operating more so to this objective, physical level and real side multi-dimensionally, as intent affects experience that facilitates its culmination, so this affords an open door for other beings and real guides to assist and step in where necessary. For as we choose such an intent of is recognition, if this intent is maintained, we can be nothing else than the eventual embodiment of such an intent placement. In reality, we are our intent placement now, but from the creational personal self-perspective, we must experience the process, as though sitting through a completed movie of our own choice and devising. For as we are the architects of our experience, we also afford the potential roles where others can step in and assist us. Really then, the guides or any being are subject to the free will decisions and agreements of others in regards to the assistance they can extend to them. In reality, the individual is assisting themselves, but has as though decided that others can fulfill such a function if they so choose. In this real side experience, I would be operating from a position that although I wasn't directly interjected into what took place, I was, however, able to have an influence upon it, specifically in regards to the key central individual involved, a stepping up and choosing to become a more aware reptilian female. As I said earlier, if we can assist others really depends on their agreement that we can, as we somewhat must play by their creational and simulated rules, as they design their own game, so to speak, and afford the roles that are available for others to assume, including all those that can impact them adversely, and the extent and specifics by which they can, and those that can step in as, say, rescuers, for example. What tends to happen as individuals initially step up is that they now are faced with the prospect of facing the entirety of their created consciousness of agreements and attachments, and to release them all. As such, in the preliminary stages, there will be much by way of agreement that can be taken advantage of in relation to others, all the potentiality of the infringement of others into their experience, and to be impacting within the parameters as set and established through the individual's consciousness of agreements, as to be expected, as the dark forces in all their expressions seek to keep all beings within creation, as agreement through all consciousness props up and maintains the dark forces' overall control structure, so they will be motivated to attack, discourage, and derail any who do decide to release this agreement. And although resigned to the parameters of a consciousness agreement, as I said, during the initial stages will be the best time to strike, before the individual begins to unravel the consciousness, and so more limiting will be the options and opportunity available for the dark forces to launch their attacking efforts. But as I said, an intent set with the ears, and everything must roll out to what is in reality an intent actualized, and despite the predictable dark force attacks, ultimately is recognitional and creational extraction must be so, assuming this intent is held to as the process rolls out creationally, and open will the individual be to assistance. The guides will step in where required, and only allow certain experience in relation to dark force adverse infringement to continue so far. Additionally, can other beings on their awareness processes have the opportunity to assist, and this would indeed be the case here in this experience. The female stepping up reptilian would most closely resemble a species as depicted in the game EverQuest called Ixars, and she was being hunted by multitudes of dark force agents of many different species, ranging from a more humanoid to a reptilian and everything in between. Initially, I would be just observing from my real awareness, aside from a creation position, as she was rather capable, very creative in her ability to evade her pursuers. As the whole situation rolled out as her being chased across various landscapes, as though she were transitioning through many dimensions in an effort to shake off her pursuers. But they were somewhat relentless and were brandishing all manner of weaponry and attempting to bring her down with a variety of assorted projectiles, all of which seemed somewhat crude and primitive, rudimentary bows and arrows and such like. All projectiles, regardless of their nature, tend to represent ideas on the real side, and should these ideas be accepted and agreed to, then this is indicated by the projectiles striking their target. That they were of a very crude design suggested these were very old, archaic ideas perhaps, outdated ideas that very likely the reptilian female had embraced for the longest time, and in regards to agreements extended and in association with the dark forces. For as a reptilian herself, very likely she had had a close affiliation with the dark forces up until this point, and a little like the mafia, once you establish association with them, generally you have accepted that to break such an association comes with the penalty of death, agreement that can be utilized by the dark forces should one of their own choose to break ranks, as it were. Despite her effort, the dark force beings were closing in. Their arrows, spears, and so forth were getting closer to hitting the target, as though she was slowly being worn down, and gradually, as though accepting of her fate. Accepting then the ideas that the projectiles represented, that she be sucked back into the ideas in affiliation with the dark forces that she had embraced previously. However, despite this, she evidently was maintaining overall her intent to move forwards with her awareness process, an open door then for assistance, and although maintaining my aside from the simulated situation position, I would as though utilize her agreement for my assistance in such a way that I was able to assume control of her simulated form, and afford her greater evasive capability, that her pursuers were unable to strike her with their assorted projectiles, and additionally would suddenly manifest within her hands a bow and a set of arrows also, and although of a similarly primitive nature weapon-wise, her arrows would be golden, and as I guided her hand, so would her arrows hit the targets that were her pursuers, suggesting her return fire as ideas that represented references pertaining to the ears. gold very much the colour often associated with the true reality. In actuality, we all are this one isness reality animating through all consciousness and affected body forms. Individuality only seeming to be so from a personal self-perspective, and in essence then, it was this isness able to operate through a simulated body form with greater effectiveness in regards to survival in creation, as allowed by the created personal self of the reptilian female, and the view as afforded my personal self would present it in this way, as though I was momentarily puppeteering the reptilian female to assure her safety, and ultimately she would leave the frustrated dark force pursuers in her tracks, having successfully evaded their projectile ideas, but had impacted them with her own, and that they had struck the targets, revealed that despite the dark force intent to harm her, they had in fact accepted her ears-related ideas, and so this attack had become an opportunity for her assailants also, that they were at least considering also the possibility of the ears. Interestingly, a scene would follow, unrelated to the one just shared, though of a similar theme and idea. It would begin in a kind of library. I would be in the company of a smaller group, and our attentions would be drawn to a larger poster that adorned one of the walls. It would bear this message: 2024, the year of surrendering. And then, a little like the situation with the reptilian female, would the same group and myself be located in a terrain that was somewhat mountainous, and we were being pursued by some kind of a monster. Interestingly, the group and I were children, and my impressions were that this was a simulated situation representing long ago, many lifetimes prior to the current one. The creature itself was a kind of deranged, ape-like being, and as the view proceeded, although it was the same being chasing the group and I, its form would alter, and eventually become that resembling more a human, and ultimately would even be wearing a very expensive suit. And for the group and I, as our pursuer went through his transitions from ape to suit-wearing man, we would as though become older, from initially children to full-grown adults. And throughout this, the sense was as though a representation of a pursuit that spanned many lifetimes, but presented in this way. As the group and I became adults, we also would continue to become more capable, and there came a moment where instead of fleeing from our pursuer, the man now dressed in his expensive attire, we would confront him. As we engaged him, he would be motivated to attack us. We would, however, best him, and in the process he revealed himself now to be a kind of alien body form, a tall, spindly creature with an oversized, bulbous head, as what transpired to be a human outer guise fell away. And although we had put down his attempted assault, we were as though giving him now an opportunity. He seemed agreeable, and indeed compensated us with a pile of coins. We parted amiably, despite what presented as though a hunt that had spanned many lifetimes. And now the group and I would board a very sophisticated tube train and accelerate from the scene, the experience ending. This could be construed as a literal hunt that conceivably may have continued throughout many lifetimes, for if the ideas are held to, the agreements between beings, potentially the same affected scenarios can be played out lifetime after lifetime, but the sense was of it being more symbolic, the pursuer representing overall the dark forces, the agreement they have through all consciousness that allows them to express their controlling inclinations. That as the form transitioned from ape to a man wearing an expensive suit, really then suggesting an evolution of the agreement, that of it becoming more so, becoming more compacted, the agreement with the dark forces layering and being added to lifetime after lifetime, and that the group and myself were aging represented the escalating idea agreement compaction, removing us from our child states of being, which can represent the purity of the years, to that of older men, as we became more fossilized with the ideas we were continuing to add to the consciousness, which present as overlaying filters of our true being states. But ultimately would come a moment where we would recognize the prudence of facing the consciousness and creation, as realistically you can't run from your own creation. You always are the effects of yourself, your agreements, until it is released, symbolically here as we confronted finally the pursuer. But just as it was with the female reptilian, where her plight actually became an opportunity that her attackers would benefit from, as this individual representing the dark forces overall would involve itself in our experience, so would that which we were deciding, the awareness process, become known to it also. And very often the exchange of a coin represents on the real side the earning of one's way, symbolized as though paying for one's awareness. For through that which we do or decide that benefits life, so we receive in equal measure a greater standing and recognition of the ears, as everything equals itself. The pursuer in the experience giving the group and I a coin, which represented then this reference and idea. And perhaps this would shed light on the meaning behind the poster in the library. 2024, the year of surrender. As a view, might this suggest a surrendering to that which we all are in creation for the purpose of, the recognition of the ears? A year, perhaps, where a big shift in overall consciousness in relation to this real purpose may take place, as for so long have we resisted this through the personal self. But eventually must come the moment where we recognize the merit of just letting go, of surrendering, releasing that which restricts us and limits us to positions other than our real awareness, true being states.
Okay, wow, Kevin, that's just terrific. Yes, that says so much, and again, the experience. There's always more to it, than the experience itself. And so this gives us an idea, and there's a time track there, of course, because it's been decided upon, and we need that too, as a heads up to see what's possible, what's coming, and and we decide if we're going to be part of that experience and learn to see, that plus more. There's always more to the experience, and so again, relating this into the physical, that's a lot. And each person has to decide for themselves, are they going to set themselves up to have some kind of ability to do this in many different ways? That's an individual decision, and you can see most of the world is not interested, which is understandable because it's a toughie. It really is. It's really hard to decide that. Wanting to become a doctor, that's easy, or a lawyer, that's easy. And we think that's really tough. No, it's not. This is tough. This is really hard. And to keep going through, it's like blindness, darkness, not being able to understand, etc. Because the so-called bigger picture is endless. And it's like looking up at the clear blue sky. What is it you see? You see, because it's not the same. Life is not what we think it is. And so the struggle goes on between, our real awareness and our personal self. And just like the butterfly trying to get out of the cocoon, it's a struggle. It's a struggle to get out and to eventually want to fly. And that itself is an experience. And just like many people have out-of-the-body experiences all the time, we all do. And at first, it's the thrills. You want the thrill of it. Oh, I can do this. I can go here. I can do all that. And that's fine. But there's still a bigger picture. It's not point to point. It's not about thrills. It's about awareness. And that is huge compared to what we consider ourselves to be. So your contribution here to this is just terrific. It's huge because, again, just from what you said there, that could take care of everything if others understood. And getting them to that point, to understand that, to just even take a look at it, that's huge. Because again, how we've been literalized and indoctrinated according to the systems to accept restriction as our reality instead of something that's not restricted. That's the challenge too. That's a huge challenge because we're so used to resisting. We're so used to accepting restriction. We're so used to being okay with being poisoned. And it's all around us, and we just think, well, it's okay. It's, I'm living, I'm fine. Well, again, this is how funny things are. And as new viewpoints come in and you consider them, and this is where many people think in terms of, well, ignorance is bliss. I really don't want to know. I'm fine. Well, you will be for a moment, but this is cause and effect creation, and nothing is stable here. Nothing at all. Even though it feels like the ground is stable and there are earthquakes. Oh, well, there's earthquakes once in a while. No, nothing is stable in creation. Nothing at all, and anything's going to happen. So I look for the next big adventure, if there's going to be one, and just prepare myself the best I can. And so it's about awareness, not about what you think you know or where you can run and hide because you got a lot of supplies and everybody else does it. No. How long is that going to last before you're totally bored? And what's so cool about your real awareness is it's never boring. But the personal self looking at that idea and trying to consider that, it seems boring. It's like, what am I going to do there? What am I going to do? What am I going to do for beyond forever? And I remember in Paul's books when it was the far country, and when Paul, and I was there too, and I was watching this because I was a little guy, and Paul said to Rebazar, when he had projected there where Rebazar was sitting on like a mountaintop in the Himalayas, and he asked him, what do you do here? See, again, that's his personal self. That's because Paul was, in the personal world. Me too, and I'm looking at this like a little kid. It's like, okay, that was his question. And Rebazar simply answered that, I'm here to help others, from here to there, go through the transition, basically was the idea. And so Rebazar does all and everything, but it's not seen. It's not seen at all. Do we know what the government's doing? Do you know what your neighbor's doing? Things are going on, the rest of the world, but you don't see it. You just see what's in your head, and you're thinking a particular way. Oh, my neighbor's probably doing this, or the government's doing that. They're working on things to help us out so the economy's better. But you can think whatever you want. Is that what's really taking place? People don't want to think that, oh, the government 24 hours a day is creating deception to fool us all and steal everything we got. That's their business. That's exactly what they're doing once you learn to see it. But you're thinking that, oh, well, there are little stinkers here and there, so we'll just vote somebody better in. That's all nonsense. It's always been nonsense. It's set up for one purpose, to control and steal. That's it. It's part of the business world, even though it looks like it's not. But again, most people don't want to see that. And just like this, they don't want to see it. And I understand, because it's easier to not see it and thinking that everything's okay, and you'll just stay unaware and go into future lifetimes. Not because I say so, it's because you've already decided. Each person decides. And yes, it is a toughie to have that focus and that balance and that intent on something that you cannot consider that's more real than this. And so thank you, Kevin, for being the great witness. It makes it a lot more fun for me that you and others are here. Yes, thank you so much. We're like kids playing in the big sandbox, and we're doing it together. So we have friends that are like and like, that see what's going on, and that's what's so cool. I always thought I'd be doing this all by myself, and that gets kind of old. But it's so great to see others, so I step back and try and make everyone else the star, because that's how precious it is. Thank you, Kevin.